Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. It is, oh, let me put that down. Today's speaker is Joe Lemeris. Hopefully I said that correctly. And he is the GIS and data manager for the SC Natural Heritage Program. He oversees the rare, threatened, and endangered species database for the state and works with biologists and environmental professionals to assist in survey design, modeling, and project review. Joe has a Master's of Environmental Management from Duke University and a BSc in Biology Conservation from Boston University. So I am really excited to hear Joe speak. I have not heard Joe speak before, and we actually just met today for the first time. So pretty exciting. But without further ado, Joe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute and I'm going to make sure that
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. This is the first time Chris and I have met, but it sounds like a really cool webinar series. So I'm going to share my screen here just to get started. And let's see. Whoops. Can you tell me? Sorry, can I just get confirmation? Are you seeing?
I see the Natural Heritage Program page right now.
Is that? Oh, okay. Whoops, I must have switched. Sorry about that. I'm just going to restart again. Let's try this again. Okay, so you're seeing the story map, yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure because I've got a few things open here. Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, my name is Joe Lemeris. I am a GIS and data manager for the South Carolina Natural Heritage Program. Been with the Department of Natural Resources for about 4 years now, and we've been pretty busy over the last 4 years. Basically, one of my main tasks when I started here was to sort of overhaul some of our systems that we use to collect and manage species data for the agency, and so I'll get into a little bit of that and just kind of give a brief overview of the program, what we do, how the data gets used, and we'll go from there. So yeah, just kind of a brief overview. For those of you who don't know, the South Carolina Natural Heritage Program is actually one of many heritage programs across the country and indeed the Western Hemisphere. So there's one in every state and every province in Canada and most of the countries in Central and South America as well. And the idea is that, back in the 1970s, South Carolina was actually the first heritage program, period. And so that the idea kind of caught like wildfire back then, and it was initially started by the Nature Conservancy at South Carolina chapter, and it was passed along to the state 2 years later. And within a few decades, you have the map that you see before you here. And the idea is that species don't really play by political boundaries. So we have to work together across states to be able to understand the threats that are facing certain species of concern, and monitor those populations across their range, just rather than just on a state-by-state basis. So while we are managed at the state level, there is an overarching program called NatureServe, which it serves as the sort of network between heritage programs across the country and the hemisphere. And so NatureServe primarily serves as that network between us, and they collect all data that each program maintains to sort of maintain this overarching master data set. And so the primary function of each heritage program is to, as I kind of alluded to earlier, sort of maintain these data sets of species of concern within our jurisdictions, and assign conservation ranks for those species and populations of species. So Right now, as it stands currently, we have over 30,000 records within the database, and it's growing every day. We work to, incorporate old data, historic data that may not be there at the moment, as well as current data that is being collected, on a weekly basis at sometimes. But anyway, each species that we track, and South Carolina specifically tracks roughly 1,200 species at this point of plants and animals. And each species is assigned a conservation rank. And you'll have multiple different conservation ranks for a species. So you'll see here, folks may have heard of G ranks or S ranks. These are assigned according to a standard that has been set by NatureServe and the Heritage Program Network. So a G rank essentially serves as a conservation rank across a species range. And then an S rank will be a rank that is assigned at the state level. So South Carolina assigns S ranks, and they are used sort of as they're incorporated into the larger G rank if a species, range overlaps multiple states. So those ranks are assigned from 1 to 5, 1 being the most critically impaired, and 5 being the most secure, so least concern, essentially. So there are cases, just to kind of give you an example of this, there are cases where you'll have a more imperiled S rank than there is a G rank, in the event, for example, that a species is found only at the fringe, the southernmost extent, for example, maybe only found in the Blue Ridge of South Carolina, but it's very common elsewhere in the country. That's one example where you might have an S1 or 2 species, but the G rank for that species is probably 3, 4, or 5 even. So in terms of what lands the Heritage Program maintains, and that's another aspect of the Heritage Program. So myself and our data or GIS analyst, Megan James, who is also on this call, I believe, we are responsible for managing the data that comes into the program, but we also have a land management arm and preserve managers. So the Heritage Trust Program in South Carolina consists of both natural and cultural heritage preserves across the state. So we have 75 properties that we've accumulated over the past 40 years, and that's growing all the time. That those acreages actually might be a little bit dated at this point, but because there are multiple additions yearly that happen. But we are, I think, the only heritage program in the country that has both cultural and natural heritage preserves. So our agency is responsible for maintaining preserves that either are maintained for a unique species found at that site or ecological community, as well as a significant archaeological or cultural resource that's found there. And so I'll just walk through a few of these types of properties across the state for those of you who may be familiar with our properties. So the Blue Ridge, will start at the top of the state and work our way south. So Issaquena Falls near Stump House Tunnel Heritage Preserve that's an example of one type of property that we maintain through the preserve system, and some other features that we preserve are things like granitic outcrops, hardwood coves, montane bogs, seeps and waterfalls, things like that. This is a photo of Stump House Tunnel in Oconee County. And so you'll see that this is a very, forested land, highly protected part of the state. Lots of public land up in this area. This is a unique feature, the tunnel system that was never finished. It was a railway tunnel that was never finished up there. And it's an important area for bats. There's multiple tunnels throughout this area of the state that are important for bat species. And so one of the interesting ways of finding some of these places could be, for example, to use a data set called LIDAR, if you're familiar This is a data set, it's very high resolution, penetrating through the canopy to be able to get accurate elevation and topographic information for those areas. And so you can kind of see this sort of path of the old railway system that would have been coming through the mountains there. And so there are scattered tunnels across this with potential, habitat for various bat species that we we're monitoring. So speaking of bat species, we'll go zoom over to another property called Table Rock State Park, very, very iconic park in South Carolina. This is not owned by and maintained through the Heritage Preserve system, but it is considered a Heritage Trust site. Is an external, it's maintained by the State Park Service, but they do have a Heritage Site designation. And it's not super common knowledge, but there is a cave at Table Rock, which is very important to some of our cave dwelling species of bats, like northern long-eared bat, for example, which is a federally listed bat species, G1, G2 rank, S1, and little brown bats are also found there. That's a federally at-risk species. Our bat biologists at DNR tries to survey this cave once every couple of years, just to monitor their populations. Zooming over to Lake Jocassee. Jocassee Gorges Wildlife Management Area and Preserve there's a large land mass here that we have that we maintain, and Oconee bells are highly well, I guess they're very, very commonly found rare species found only in these areas of South Carolina and North Carolina. They are fairly stable, G3, S3, which is considered vulnerable, but they are so rain restricted that's why they bring their rank is a little bit more elevated. Down to the Piedmont here, we have seepage forests and more granitic outcrops, isolated monadnocks, Piedmont Cove forests, and other Piedmont prairies, which is another relic ecosystem that we try to maintain within our preserves. 40-acre Rock Heritage Preserve is an example of a unique ecosystem and habitat that, within the Piedmont, with some really interesting seeps on top of these granitic outcrops that house pretty isolated populations of unique plant species. More broadly, I mentioned prairie ecosystems. A lot of these types of prairie species were maintained by fire historically, and much of the Piedmont has not really had an opportunity to see a fire-maintained ecosystem over the years. So these species have become more and more imperiled. Schweinetz's sunflower is one example, federally endangered sunflower species endemic to the Charlotte metropolitan and surrounding areas. Piedmont prairie habitat, like I mentioned before, this is one of our properties, Rock Hill Blackjack Heritage Preserve in York County. Pretty open understory savanna type ecosystem with lots of unique species that grow there. And then on the animal side, we've got Carolina heel splitter, which is a federally endangered mussel species, which is found in this area as well as some other areas in the Edgefield, McCormick County area near the Sumter National Forest that have declined due to water quality issues and other sedimentation problems. In the sandhills, the coastal plain, you'll see some bottomland hardwood forests, Atlantic white cedar bogs, sandstone outcrops. Of course, longleaf pine ecosystems are a focus of concern here, and a lot of fire maintained ecosystems are found across the sandhills and the coastal plain. So DNR has active fire management programs where we do controlled burns across our properties for those to enhance habitat for those species. One type of unique habitat is a Carolina Bay ecosystem. So there's this, you can see sort of these interesting sort of ellipse-shaped features, sand rims, and bay habitats that show up here across the coastal plain. And this is Lewis Ocean Bay Heritage Preserve near Myrtle Beach. That is a very highly concentrated area of multiple Carolina bays, and is important for a lot of amphibian and reptile species, as well as unique plant species like Venus flytrap. More species that are involved in these longleaf pine savanna ecosystems include things like gopher tortoise, which is a federal at-risk and state endangered species. An example here is from Aiken Gopher Tortoise Heritage Preserve in Aiken County. You'll see on this map here that it's very, very sparse, looks almost barren in some areas, but there is some level of overstory component, and this is a pretty prime habitat for gopher tortoise here. It's a significant management tool. Control burning is to restore and maintain this type of habitat. And to continue to talk about some of those that need fire, gopher frog and frosted flatwood salamander are two species of amphibian that require this type of fire maintained ecosystem, along with these ephemeral isolated wetlands that appear. They use both the wetlands as well as the upland fire maintained ecosystems to survive in their adult stages. So these are some pretty unique areas. And as you can imagine, this is Francis Marion National Forest. It becomes difficult the more and more urban development surrounds these types of areas over time. So managing becomes more difficult as the population grows in some of these areas. And finally, down to the coastal zone where Port Royal is and where this conservancy is based here. You'll find, of course, maritime forests that we protect, nesting bird sanctuaries. We have a number of preserves that are dedicated shorebird sanctuaries, beaches, tidal marshes, and various other properties for protecting things like wading birds and waterfowl. Example of this would be DeVoe Bank. Some of you may have heard from our shorebird biologist, Felicia Sanders. They recently, last year or so, made an interesting discovery here where one of the largest populations of, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the species.
Wimbrel.
Well, that's right, Wimbrel, thank you. Yes, the largest populations of Wimbrel were found here. Many tens of thousands of birds overnighting on this island, and only recently just found out that was the case. So that's a very significant property here. Black rail, of course, is another threatened species that we maintain habitat for on some of our WMAs in the Ace Basin. They require very specific water levels for marshlands that are required for nesting and foraging. And so all that to say, this is a sort of very quick tour of some of the types of properties and species that we're managing within this database. We use this data to try and assist our ability to conserve landscapes at a targeted level that might benefit some of these more imperiled species of concern. So you'll see this is a map here, of course, the state with our current protected lands. So, green would be federally protected, brown is state level owned, and then these red areas are private conservation. So through various partners, specifically the Southeastern Conservation Adaptation Strategy, this is a region-wide initiative to gain 10% or greater improvement in health, function, and connectivity of Southeastern ecosystems by 2060. So a lot of our data that we collect and maintain go into these types of models to identify priority landscapes across the Southeast that could serve as corridors for wildlife connectivity, and stitching together other sub-regional plans, different initiatives and products into one consistent map to figure out where these areas are most important. So some of this is the type of one type of model that these data can be contributing toward. So I talked a lot about, the data, right? So what does the data look like? How is it collected? So when we talk about species data, we mostly talk about I refer to it as I'll probably say occurrence a lot. So occurrence data, species occurrence data, is typically a location on the ground that's important to a species. For birds, for example, it can be a nest. Foraging areas, for example, is another possibility. For bats, it could be hibernacula, a roost tree, or a maternity roost, a collection of species, things like that. So it could be different for different groups of species. So what we've been able to do over the last couple of years is incorporate a lot more online data collection and reporting. We have online forms that are available for use on our website, and folks are able to now go in and monitor and report species of concern that they may find while they're out. Members of the public, but also partner groups, agencies, and organizations submitting species record just from their phone, basically, and they can, use the location on their phone. They'll take a point, or you can draw a line or a polygon if it is a larger area, and submit it, and we'll get it, and we can verify that that is an accurate record and put it into the database. We use citizen science data as well. So if you are a user of eBird or iNaturalist, some of these bigger names, there's also other groups, other websites. GBIF is one, HerpMapper is another. We compile data from all of these different sources to try and get a better picture for certain species that we may not be able to survey as easily. So those are helpful for filling in gaps where we don't necessarily have the ability to survey everywhere. DNR also has some species-specific monitoring forms. I mentioned that this one here is sort of generic. You can type in a species, any species, and it'll show up on the list, and you can report it. But we do have some targeted programs as well. So we help to set up various monitoring systems for reporting species like manatee. Folks at the coast can upload photos of any manatee sightings that they may see, and it goes into our database of public manatee sightings. And this information can be is accessible to Fish and Wildlife Service, who uses this data as part of their reviews for maintaining those status assessments and ensuring that they're getting all the information for where certain individuals are traveling to and from. They try to track individual movements, and can sometimes identify certain individuals based on the photos that are submitted. So it's a kind of a unique feature here. We also, contrary to I've been talking about imperiled species, but conversely, we also try and help some of our programs track invasive species. So you may have seen DNR post some press releases over the last year or so about the Argentinian black and white tegu lizard, which is not native to South Carolina. It's native to Argentina and Central and South America. They have been found in South Carolina in the last couple of years, likely released from the pet trade, potentially just escaped from somebody's home or what have you. But they've become a problem in other states nearby, Georgia being one, and we're hoping to make sure that they don't necessarily, they don't get out of hand here. So as somebody reports a potential sighting, we verify to make sure that that is actually what they're seeing, and we'll try and work with those folks to track it down before they start potentially breeding in the wild and persisting. So how is this data used? There's quite a few ways that this is used, and I've alluded to a few. But far and away, the largest user group of this data is sort of the environmental professional community. So when a developer is developing any sort of project, could be at a solar farm, a cell tower, an apartment complex, a pipeline, a roadway, whatever. There are often environmental consultants that are hired to perform due diligence, make sure that there are no species that are found nearby that could be impacted. And so we have, as our data set is the most comprehensive of imperiled species in the state, they typically use our data set as a first pass and then provide that report to the Fish and Wildlife Service as their sort of proof of due diligence, so to speak. The feds and the state agencies will also use this for regulatory review. So this is an example of our internal and state level reviewer tools that are shared with state and federal agencies so that they can provide comment on projects that require permits, so that they can make sure that that they're seeing the most up-to-date data as possible. And then, like I said, consultants will perform due diligence in the arenas of forestry. Land trusts, for example, can use them for conservation, and those reports are automated, so they can actually interact here. Let's see if I can play this. So we have an online portal that's been built, and professionals can log in and zoom to their area of concern. Say they have a property that they're going to consider developing. They can both view individual records that are there and identify their ranks and their status, but they can also enter in some information about a potential project and draw it in on the map, or upload a previous shape if they already have one, and click run. And when they run that tool, within a few minutes, what will happen is we will get notified, and we are able to track projects coming in for review, and they receive an automated report with all of that information, the project area, the buffer area around that, and a list of any species that might be found nearby, along with specific information about those species. So if, for example, a gopher frog was found within the project area, they would get some text here on the best management practices page that would elaborate what the best survey guidelines would be, if there's any restrictions, whether or not they need to get a permit, things like that. So as it relates, as these reports relate to the environmental consulting arena back at the federal side, there are many species I mentioned at risk earlier. The species is considered at risk if it has been proposed for determination for listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So either petitioned by an external source, or if they themselves have evaluated that it needs to be looked at for listing. And the Southeast has far and away the largest brunt of potential species that have to be reviewed in order to understand, or in order to assign whether or not they are considered federally threatened or endangered. And so that is one of the bigger use cases for this data. To continue on here, we're also, I mentioned here that these data sets, this is an example from the environmental professionals page. You'll see that these records are primarily just points on a map, sometimes lines, sometimes polygons, but often just small little patches of populations and locations where a species has been observed. But as you can imagine, we cannot survey everywhere in the state. It's just impossible to do that. And so we need to be able to come up with some better ways of identifying where species might be found, even if we haven't necessarily surveyed there. So modeling has become a new tool that a lot of organizations have started to employ to be able to get at that question. And so we have started developing some different workflows to be able to use these occurrence data as a starting point and combine it with some environmental variables, for example, climate data, temperature, humidity, things like that, elevation, and all of those varying types of information, soil data, a number of different things. It can vary depending on the species. Combining all that together and producing a sort of probability of occurrence or probability of suitable habitat at a given location. So this is an example that we've done. This is not in any way complete. We've just sort of early stages have been working on this, but just to give you an idea, there's a couple different methods to employ in these models, and this is for Venus flytrap we were talking about earlier. An important area for Venus flytrap in the state is in the Horry County area, Lewis Ocean Bay. The green boxes are where known records have been found, and the sort of yellow to red colors are areas where the model suspects, based on these environmental variables, where they might be considered suitable habitat. And so you can see here that this could potentially allow us, here there's a zoomed up image here. This is a sort of a kind of like a treasure map, so to speak. It can serve as a helpful tool to be able to give us an idea where these species might be found that we haven't surveyed yet. Venus flytrap is an interesting one because there are historic records from Georgetown and Charleston counties, but we have not since been able to locate any in a number of decades. And so using models like this could be a sort of first pass guiding source to understand where we might want to target surveys. And when we go to these types of places and we either find something or don't find something, those data can then be put back into the model to make the model actually produce a more refined output that could be more, it'll get better and better the more data we feed into it, so to speak. So with that, there's a few pages that I have here highlighted as to where these data can be incorporated. The map of biodiversity importance. This is a product by NatureServe that has been this was created a few years ago in collaboration with Esri that combines heritage data across the country for at-risk and listed species to understand, basically use this modeling sort of methodology to create those types of models for thousands of at-risk species across the country, and create a map that shows where the most imperiled species are found in the state. And so you can see here, there's quite a few different resources that you can find through NatureServe's site, and I can provide these links to you in the chat at the end. I forgot to do that in the beginning. I'll do that afterward. But you can see that South Carolina has some pretty high areas of concern along the coast and in the mountains, especially, where they're considered, sort of hotspots, biodiversity hotspots for imperiled species. And so the idea is that now that if we know where they are, we can try to make steps to protect those places. And lastly, I mentioned that we have an online data portal that folks can log into, but there are some public resources available as well. I'll put the link to this in the chat also. This is our Natural Heritage Program data page that can be is available to the public, that shows us the number of tracked species, number of globally imperiled species found in the state, and number of protected species. You can also search our tracked list based on things that you're interested in, whether or not you want to look at plants or animals, only listed species, things like that. And there are links to our various public forums. I mentioned our tracked species reporting forum earlier. That's here. We also have a number of targeted forums: bald eagle forum, sea turtle forum, manatee forums, and then our login content for partners and professionals is down here as well. This is just a brief video of an example of one of the public applications that we have available, where you can look at a list based on your county, see what tracked species are found there, and break it out by status. And if you're interested in learning where a specific species is across the state, you can look at the distribution of that species across counties, ecoregions, or watersheds in the state. So that's all publicly available information on our site. So with that, I think I can take any questions. I know it was a lot of information.
That was awesome.
But yeah, we've worked to sort of grow this page over the last few years into what it is now, and are always looking to expose it to more folks. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Joe. So I have a question from an attendee. So why does the Southeast have so many more species that need to be evaluated than other areas, say 507 compared to most other areas in the 40s or 50s?
Right. Well, one of the biggest reasons, I think, is because the Southeast has some of the most biodiverse areas in the country in general. And a lot of those areas are considered unprotected. As you know, out west, the further west you go, there's a lot more percentage of protected public lands, and out back east here, most of that is private lands. The proportion of private lands to public lands is much different. But we do have a larger just number of species in general across the Southeast. This is, of course, broad strokes, but in terms of reptiles and amphibians, for example, the Southeast is a biodiversity hotspot, and so a lot of these species either just haven't been evaluated, or they need to be reevaluated for, based on various trends if species have been declining over the last few years.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to wait another minute or two if there's any more questions. I really enjoyed that, especially just seeing that location map for the Venus flytraps. I think that's a pretty awesome algorithm you have going on, the predictive modeling. That's pretty neat. Has that predictive modeling held true in other cases where you've gone out and tested where those locations are and seen possibly if there's signs of other species within that?
So in South Carolina, the modeling effort is relatively new. We're still sort of growing that program, and a lot of our models are sort of draft form at this point. Yeah, we haven't really done any of our own modeling up until recently. However, I will say that other organizations and entities have done models for species in South Carolina, and we've used those, and in some cases we have been able to find new populations. So for example, one species, Carolina bird in a nest, which is a plant species that's currently up for listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service, McBridea caroliniana. There is a distribution model that exists for that the Fish and Wildlife Service and DNR has been using to guide surveys, and there has been a number of new records found based on those. So,
is there any of that predictive modeling that's been open to the public, or is that all kind of
not well? At least the stuff that we have produced is not yet, because it's not finalized. The idea will be that once we have models that are robust enough and have been, sort of reviewed by experts to make sure that they sort of represent, as close to true to the ground as possible. There's always going to be some error associated with that, but the goal will be to eventually produce some sort of model that can be incorporated into our tools and our reporting tools to say, hey, this area is likely habitat or possibly habitat for species XYZ, and so that will eventually be something that we'd like to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Really cool. Is there anything you want to share in the chat? A link to the website, anything like that?
Sorry about that. I know I was supposed to do that beforehand.
No, so, that's perfectly fine.
So yeah, my name and email address, as well as the link to the Heritage Program website is up there. I will also provide a link to the NatureServe site, so that we can, let's see, if anybody's interested in going there to check out some more information about what's been done on a national level, that's there as well. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate it, Joe. I think everyone else really enjoyed it. If anybody has any questions, or if you think of any questions, you're always welcome to email me and I can pass those along to Joe. But thank you so much for your time and putting this together.
Absolutely. Thanks again for the invite. And yeah, as Chris said, feel free to reach out if you do have any additional questions or follow up. I'm happy to, help guide through any of our data products. So.
And I will also mention that today's talk was recorded, and with Joe's permission, I'm going to publish this on our website, so for anybody to see, so you can keep an eye out for that. Cool. All right. Well, everyone have a great day and a wonderful week. It's beautiful out, so enjoy it. And
thanks, you too.
You have a great one, Joe. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.